Hello, everybody. Welcome to my next HSP Extrovert Awareness session. This one I am joined by a very special guest, Amy Taylor. And today we're going to be talking about, probably the simplest way to put it is living with FLO. I like that name of your course, which we'll talk to people about later. And HSP Extrovert Awareness it session. Is showing up on Facebook. Okay, so if I keep looking at my phone, it's because I need to check the comments. So if you are watching this live, please come and say hello to us. We love knowing that there's people there. And if you're watching the recording or the replay, please let us know below. You can put hashtag replay, or we love hearing where you're tuning in from, because I love seeing how this can kind of go worldwide. So please let us know below. Heather's joined us. Hi, Heather. Thanks for coming. So the reason I asked Amy to come along and talk to us in HSP Extrovert Awareness Week is because I've always been fascinated by, because Amy talks a lot about her cycle and what she's doing and how that kind of helps her productivity. And it's something that's always fascinated me. And because my audience is predominantly women and we're HSP extroverts, I feel like, well, HSP extroverts, HSPs in general, are very governed by our emotions. Our moods affect our emotions. So I thought this would be a very relevant topic for our audience, I suppose. So I'll just give you a bit of a background on Amy first, and then I'll let her tell her story in terms of discovering HSP, how she ended up doing what she's doing now. So Amy Taylor is a grounded planning specialist using strategic thinking to guide service-based business owners such as coaches, consultants, mentors, and teachers to believe in, own, and share their expertise. As a result, they feel fulfilled, develop resilience, get organised, and are grounded when they face chaos. Oh, that sounds good. As an expert in patterns, profiles, and preferences, she offers a unique perspective to problem solving. She's a huge fan of jigsaw puzzles, has pieced together a book and 2 signature frameworks, and she can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 2 minutes. Now, that's impressive. And as a paid mentor for Australasia's largest coaching school, Amy has mentored hundreds of budding coaches. She's a mum to 4 kids. She's married to a shift work. I love this description of your husband too. She's married to a shift working, train obsessed husband. And she always wanted a business she could fit in between school pickups and drop offs. So she now owns 1 cat, but for a long time owned 7. So I think Carol could relate to that, because I think Carol's got 6. She also owns and cares for 5 chickens, which I'm quite envious of, because I want to get chickens one day too. I had them growing up. Or actually, no, our neighbours did, but we were allowed to go and feed them. So I'd love to get some chickens too. So hello, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you here today, sharing your expertise with us. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I think the HSP thing, it's always been there. And for a long time, it felt like, so I am a profile junkie, and often didn't fit in or had conflicting results. And I think it's this HSP-E component that allows that to happen. So I am quite outgoing. I can be quite focused. I can be quite driven, but I can also be quite, I don't know that shy is quite the right word, but I can be quite reserved, and I look shy on occasion. And this dance between I want to be in the middle of the action, the extrovert in me comes out, and then the HSP piece of me comes out, and they look quite conflicting. And often in my public space, the extrovert comes out far more. And I for a long time didn't own that HSP part of me, but it was always there. And I'd go places, and coaches and mentors along the years have said things like, well, Amy will have no problem with that. I'm like, actually, Amy does have a problem with that. Like I do have these, and the depth of processing and the reservations and the that part of me rarely came out in public though. And so they would see the extroverted, but I would get home from a weekend away and it'd take me 2 weeks to recover. Coupled with the PMDD, which is what drew me to exploring cycles and productivity. So PMDD has a big fancy name, but basically it's PMS on steroids. So instead of my PMS lasting 2 to 3 days, it lasts 2 to 3 weeks, which doesn't leave very much of the month left to get stuff done and to go out and to be active. So I think the HSP-E and the PMDD are very closely correlated. And I know you're the same as me. We'd love to see some studies done on those correlations, and because it's definitely a brain chemistry thing that kind of comes into play. But finding out, I was listening to you chatting with a mutual friend coach talking about this and the dispelling the myth of the ambivert. So I'd always thought, because I've got introversion tendencies from the HSP side and I've got extroversion tendencies from and I never knew which one I was. And so the ambivert was very appealing. And then I think the headline, like, there's no such thing as an ambivert. And I'm like, well, if there's no such thing as an ambivert, now what am I? Where do I fit? But listening to you speak really allowed me to connect with my uniqueness and how this is special. And the more I own that, the more I make sense to myself. And ultimately, I mean, the reason I'm a profile junkie is I just want to make sense to myself. I want to understand myself and I want to know how I work and why I tick. And discovering that I'm HSP-E was definitely a massive piece that allowed me to reconcile that inner conflict in a lot of ways of, well, I do need to retreat. I do need my time out. I do need the recovery time, but I also need to go out and have people and play and engage. And so that ability to reconcile those seemingly conflicting personalities. My husband recently has taken to saying, he said, I fell in love with you for your personality. Lucky you've got lots to choose from. And there's an element of me that kind of wants to smack him for that. But I think it's also quite accurate. And the HSP-E definitely looks like multiple personalities, because there are days where I'm like, you know what? I want people, play with me, engage with me. And then there are other days I'm like, I don't want people. What do you mean I need to go out and talk to you? But
Get away.
And so, yeah, I get where he's coming from. But understanding that about myself was such a gift, because it does reconcile all those other profiles that I've done where I look seemingly conflicted. Like I would do them one day and I get one result, and I do them another day and I get a different, like completely different result. And how do I reconcile that? So yeah, so I really appreciate that insight into myself and love that I've added that into my awareness. It's been such a wonderful gift.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad to be a part of that, because I love hearing stories like this where people will say to me, oh, when I came across you, this is what happened to me. And it just is so humbling to hear the impact that I'm having on people. So thank you for sharing that. And I think just a couple of things on what you said. I think I just saw Penny's on live as well. Hi, Penny. So Penny was our guest yesterday, so she's tuned in as well. So I think a couple of things on what you said. First of all is the reserved or the appear shy thing. So just for people who are perhaps a little bit new to this HSP-E thing, that's very common for HSPs. And it's because of our depth of processing that we don't necessarily dive right in. So we go to a new environment, or we go to a party where we don't necessarily know everybody, and we tend to be quite reserved to start with. And that's just a natural function of us. So if you can understand that about yourself, it does make it a little bit easier, but it does also explain why, as you say, people sometimes get the wrong idea about us. And the other thing I wanted to say was about the kind of the multiple personalities, because I think everybody who's a HSP-E can relate to that. And it really is about the balancing act between the two parts of us. And I think for all HSP extroverts, if you can kind of visualize in your mind that you have your extrovert self and then your HSP self, and they have very conflicting needs and requirements. And the way I kind of like to visualize it is like a bit of a seesaw. You're trying to find the balance, but you're rarely going to be in the middle of the seesaw like that. One of your sides is going to be kind of dominating at the time. And that's okay. And I think that's the key for a lot of HSP extroverts, is to not fight that. And I think if you can just say to yourself, oh, my extrovert side needs to come out to play today, which is what you now recognize, Amy, and then you can actually allow that to happen. But then it's also key to then recognize when your HSP side's going, oh no, it's a bit too much, it's a bit too much, I need to escape now. And so you can find ways to manage both of those. And I think that's probably the best tip I can give any HSP extrovert, is just to respect both of those sides and their needs, and when they need to perhaps have a little bit of extra nurturing because they've been a bit neglected, for example, because the other side's been dominating. Yeah. So thank you for sharing your story. And in terms of my story with energy, I just wanted to kind of preface or kind of summarize that before we get into some questions for Amy. So most of you know I've got a chronic illness. I've got myalgic encephalomyelitis, commonly known as chronic fatigue. I don't like the term chronic fatigue because people just think I'm tired all the time. That's probably one of the easiest symptoms to deal with. They're suggesting it's a neurological condition. There's a lot of unknowns about it, but it does have quite a significant impact on my life. And most people who see me online don't know that. They don't see the days that I'm stuck in bed because I feel like I've got the flu and I'm filled with body pain and all that sort of stuff. So energy has been something that's obviously quite forefront in my mind ever since I got diagnosed. And the other reason that I've always been drawn to Amy's talking about her cycle and that sort of stuff is because when I first got sick, it actually kind of started with like really extreme PMS symptoms. I've managed to kind of normalize that a little bit with all the work I've done on myself in the last 6 years. But I still definitely noticed that on day one of my menstruation, for example, I'm tired. And since I learned that kind of that's normal, I've been able to kind of go, you know what, just have a rest, have a slow day, and that's okay. So I think what I found and what I think, and obviously Amy's going to share her expertise on this, but I think by recognizing how your cycle impacts you, it can almost give you permission to take a break, or because we are very hard on ourselves, HSPs, as a general rule. We set ourselves quite high standards and we're very hard on ourselves when we don't meet those high standards. So I feel like this could be really a gift in terms of helping give you permission, people watching, to cut yourself a bit of slack potentially, but also just kind of use it to your advantage. And so in terms of that, Amy, one of the first thing I wanted to ask you is, because I read something about basically we're wired, and obviously everybody knows this, women are wired different to men, whereas we live in a society where the 9 to 5 work week, Monday to Friday, is kind of geared to the way men work, is what I read somewhere. So can you just elaborate on like why are men and women different when it comes to productivity? Because we obviously know we're different.
Yeah, also the major difference, I mean, men have, and this is not my expertise in terms of the hormones and those kinds of things. The how to navigate it and leverage it is where I have the most expertise. My very basic general understanding is they have a 24-hour hormone cycle. And so things like, where did that word go? The circadian rhythm studies are almost always done on men. So years ago, researchers stopped studying women because women are too complicated. They don't fit into the results. And so all of the routines, all of the productivity, a lot of the health studies, we're looking at studies from 50 years ago, they're all done on men. So all of the research that suggests that a morning routine is better for us, or having a 24-hour routine, getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, all of that research is done on men because generally women didn't fit within the parameters. And rather than working out what's different about women, they just excluded them from the studies. It's too hard to work you out. We're just going to put you to the side. We're going to study men because they're consistent and it's easy to follow, which is ridiculous. So all
it
of the
kind of goes against everything about research, doesn't it? But it makes sense. They take the easy options.
It's far easier to study because they've got that 24-hour cycle. So they can study them. They can study the way they engage in habits, the way they engage in productivity, when is the best time. And they're fairly consistent. So if a man looks at his best time of working, it's going to be the same tomorrow as it was yesterday, generally. When women look at it, we have the 28-day cycle. So there's sort of the 24-day, the week, the 28-day, and then quarterly cycles. So seasons will have an impact on us as well. So the summer, autumn, winter, spring. I noticed the other day, I was like in full on, I'm like, why am I in this space? It's spring, Amy, settle, do spring stuff instead of trying to do, I can't remember what I was trying to do, but it was out of season. It's trying to eat fruit that's out of season. You can grow it out of season, but it's never as good as the in-season stuff. So we, as women, we still have circadian rhythms, but they're generally on a 28-day cycle. So like you said, the first couple of days of menstruation are generally more fatigued, are generally more tired. We're generally less active, but there's other things we can do. And the obstacle we hit in society is that unless we're physically doing an active, it doesn't seem to count as productive. And yet things like planning, things like reflection, things like connecting with other people are all parts of productivity that we tend to dismiss. It's like, but I'm not doing something. I'm not. And my husband does this all the time. I'm like, can we just sit down and have a conversation? Let's just connect. It's like, but the dishes need doing. Can we connect while I do the dishes?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder, can I pick up on that? Because that's something that is kind of a big bugbear of mine in today's society. So I just really wanted to hit this point home, is that, and this comes again to our own expectations and the high standards of ourselves, is that we live in a society where sitting down and reading a book or just sitting down and reflecting and contemplating is often seen as lazy. And because we live in this busy society, busyness is rewarded. Busyness has become a status symbol even. Like if you say, if you said to me, well, how many hours a week do you do? And I'd say, oh, sometimes only 4 or 5, because that's all I can manage, sometimes even less than that. People would think that I was lazy or that I wasn't very successful, because we define success by how busy we are. So it's just really wanted to highlight that, because I think that's a really good point, is that there are other parts of productivity that we've kind of been conditioned to not include or not count or dismiss, in fact. So I think it's really good that you highlighted that.
Yeah, and those weeks where you do 4 or 5, it's 4 or 5 hours of active work, because that's all we seem to count. But I guarantee you didn't do 4 or 5 hours of work. You would have done reflection, you would have done connecting with people, you would have done connecting with yourself, rejuvenating you. So there's a whole pile of other things that we just don't seem to count, because so rest is productive, which is just a massive challenge for so many people to accept. It's like taking a nap can be the most productive thing we can do, particularly in our menstrual phase. Taking a nap, deep luteal naps are my best friend, because that is the most productive thing I can do. I need to rest and rejuvenate, and I wake up refreshed, and then I can be more creative. I can be more active. And so it's the acknowledgement of that. I think that's a point both of us are like really quite keen for people to embrace. Busy doesn't have to be that badge of honor that society has given it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you said about the reflection and all of that sort of stuff is so valid as well, because I know that something that I resisted for a long time, and I think most people who kind of run their own business could relate to this, is that the taking time off. Because when you've got your own business, there is literally always something you could be doing. So a lot of us resist that whole taking a break and taking a holiday. We might kind of half take a holiday, but we're still actually really doing stuff. So for example, someone like me might take time off from seeing clients, but I'm still actually working. But what I noticed is when I actually, and this was quite often when it was forced on me, because Warren wanted to go off grid, so away from technology, away from the internet. the really, really valuable lesson I learned from this is some of my best ideas came from that time, because I was forced to switch off the phone. I was forced to get out of my Facebook group and not keep having conversations in there. And so what I've now come to appreciate is that downtime is also productive. As you say, you do get some really great ideas, you get some really good benefits from taking time out.
Yeah, so creativity is built on that rejuvenation. If we're not taking that time out, our creativity will always be at a lower percentage. So the more we give ourselves, our minds, just the space to tap into, because otherwise we're just doing the same things over and over again. When we want to embrace something new, we've got to step out of that sort of whirlwind and play somewhere else. Yeah, absolutely.
And because the other thing I found about it was even just I suppose the sense I had, because before taking that time, it felt like I was almost kind of wading through water. Like I was kind of, it was almost like a struggle. Like, what should I do now? Because I remember it was around a time where I was trying to introduce more products or new products to my group. And I was thinking, oh, well, let's try this group coaching sessions. What topic could I do? And it did really feel a lot like pushing shit uphill, to be honest. And when I took that time out, as you say, it creates that space for the ideas to come. And guess what? Those ideas were so much better. In fact, I think they were the ideas in terms of what my audience needed or what they wanted. Whereas before, it was just like I was trying to force it, and it didn't feel good. And it also wasn't effective, because I wasn't actually coming up with good ideas. So I think I just wanted to share that, as well as just the sense was it was a really different space, and actually a much more pleasurable space to be in. So now I crave those times, because I know what's going to come from them.
Yeah, I think one of the other pieces to add to that, so innovation and creativity require us to step out of the everyday, which means moving away from things like discipline, hustle, and push. We're not conditioned for that. So society is not geared. We're starting to move towards it more these days, but we're geared for tasks that didn't require creativity. Be the factory worker and just move. You don't need to be creative when you're doing the same thing over and over again. And that's what we're conditioned into, is the do the same thing. Don't think outside the square. Follow the same process. And that's where discipline and hustle and all of those things work really well. If you're doing something that there is a clear stepping stone process for. If we're innovating or creating or stepping into something new, we can't come with those old, they just don't work. And so we've got to embrace, and this is what I love about the cycle, is that there's a time for each of these within the phases. And so I can leverage, and sometimes I don't, like this month my cycle is slightly off and I'm not quite tapping into the energies quite the way I normally would, but I know that it'll realign in a month or two and I can tap into them. Whereas the 24-hour cycle, the morning routine and the move through and the follow this, it's not designed for innovation. It's designed for repetition. And there's a place for that. My husband drives the freight trains. He drives them the same way. They move things from A to B. It works really well for him in that space. Mind you, his circadian rhythms are all out with the shift work, but the following the same process, he doesn't need to be particularly creative and innovative. There's a system there. Occasionally when they're shunting, they do, but it doesn't need that same time out. The things on repeat don't need it. But when we're running our own businesses, even parenting, there's so many new things. Kids kind of get to a new phase and it's like, all right, well, now I've got to be creative and innovative and navigate this new version of this little person that I'm raising. And it requires us to take that time out, to take that step back out, to have that reflective process. And I think as HSPs, sometimes we can get caught in that reflective process and get stuck there and not move out of it. So there's also a place for the action as well, but it's a real balance, act and a dance. It's back to that seesaw metaphor that you had before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny you shared that about the morning routine, because I read the book The Miracle Morning. Yeah. He's an ex-Cutco guy as well. So, which I thought was quite random, but anyway. And so I actually implemented his steps in the morning routine, and I really enjoyed it. And I got really good at doing my morning routine. But then guess what happened? Obviously, because I was trying to live in that 24-hour cycle, it eventually fell away, or I did it, missed a day and then did it again. But what I did was I started beating myself up about the fact, oh, I don't do my morning routine anymore. It was so good for me. But now I feel like I can cut myself a bit more slack listening to you, because it makes sense why it was a struggle for me to keep doing it at the same or roughly the same time every morning, because that's tapping into that 24-hour cycle, which obviously doesn't work for us. So thank you for giving me that blessing, because I feel a bit better about the fact that it kind of fell by the wayside.
Yeah, well, and there'll be a phase where it works really well for you. So often those kinds of things work really well for us, and generally we instigate them in our ovulation phase. And so, and I do this all the time. I still fall into this habit. I'm like in my highest peak energy, and I set myself up and I create some routines, and then a week later my energy drops and I plummet, and I can't work out why I'm not keeping up with what I was doing in my highest energy. And so when I'm working with clients, I always encourage them, okay, in menstrual, work out your basic routine, because that's when we're at our worst. Deep luteals, but that's when we're at our worst. That's when we're at our low, and worst is the wrong word, but our lowest energy, our lowest level of routine and wanting to follow. So create the routines there. And if you do more in ovulation, awesome, rock forth. But then the baseline is set. And this is something I learned, particularly with the PMDD, but also with the postnatal depression that I had. Just on your worst days, create routines, because they're the ones you're going to be able, if you can do it on your worst day or your lowest day, or in the most or the least energy phase, you're going to be able to maintain it. But if you do it when you feel great, or when you're feeling really hyped up and psyched, it is going to fade, and then our default is to beat ourselves up. But it's not that, it's that we set it, so leverage it while you can. What is it? Make hay while the sun shines. That kind of, do what you can while you can, but allow yourself to set the baseline routines at our lowest point. And I mean, my worst days these days are better than my best days were 5 to 10 years ago. I am in such a better place, and my energy is so much more manic because I do this consistently, and it builds and it's got a flow-on effect. But I still have to remind myself, it's like, oh my God, I had such a great day today. I'm going to do that again tomorrow. And it's like, no, you're not. Just maybe you'll do it again tomorrow, but you're not going to be doing the same thing next week.
Mm-hmm.
Calm down and just set. So when we're setting routines, and I fell into it like yesterday, I'm like, I need to set up my new routines. And I wrote down all my routines. I'm like, yep, that's a great idea for my best days. And I'm going to look at that in a week. And then I'm going to pick out what's sustainable in my lower energy days, because creating it on our best days sets us up for failure. So it's working to our average potential instead of our full potential. We can't always operate at that massive full potential. There are low days and average days as well that we need to account for.
Yeah, love it. That makes so much sense. And I think you might have just answered Penny's question, but I'll just double check. So because Penny just said, so how should our morning routine go for women? So Penny, does what Amy just say answer your question in terms of setting your routine on your lower energy days, and then when you're high energy, then do the extra if you want to, but don't set yourself up for failure. So Penny, just let us know if that answers what you were asking.
If I can add to that, Jen, ideally we have 5 routines as women. So instead of just one morning routine, so one of the coaching models or exercises that comes out quite often in my coaching model is the ideal average day. I have 5. So I know what my ideal average day looks like in each of the 5 phases, because it's different. So in ovulation, I'm out and I'm talking to people and I'm doing lots and I'm connecting and I'm far more active, and it's the days where I'm likely to take my kids to the swimming pool in summer, and all of those highly consumption, like energy consumption, particularly as a HSP, going to a large crowded space takes a lot of energy. So I do that in ovulation. But my ideal average day for menstruation isn't taking my kids to the swimming pool and isn't getting on Facebook Live and it's curling up in bed watching Netflix, quite frankly. Like and maybe I do a little bit of journaling and maybe I do a little bit of like connecting with my dream and my vision. So ideally we've got the 5 and we create the options and then we know energetically, okay, well, this is where I'm at in my cycle. This is what today's going to look like. My cleaning schedules, my sex life, my everything is done in alignment with my flow, my business plans. And I went into my son's room last night and said, you didn't clean my room. I'm like, no. He's like, but it's that phase, mummy. Why didn't you clean my room? My kids are aware. My tea, I drink tea in alignment with my cycle. I have different flavors of tea for each of the different phases. So it is definitely operating from that lowest level as our baseline, but it's also knowing what's the energy of each phase so that we're tapping into. So ovulation is active, menstruation is reflective. Actually, menstruation is imaginative, deep luteal is reflective. And so tapping into all of which is in the free course that we're going to talk about at the end, like that outline. So yeah, ideally women would have 5 morning routines, 5 ideal average days so that we can, and we can't always schedule it. Like it doesn't always align. So if I get invited to be a guest speaker, it doesn't always align. I couldn't get you to change HSP. And incidentally, it did actually line up perfectly for my phase.
Happy to be of assistance.
And every now and then it will, but generally, like we can't always align. So we can tap into and just being aware. Okay, well, I'm going to have to speak. I know I'm going to be in menstruation, for example. I know I'm going to be more tired. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do my hour or my 90 minutes of rocking out. And then I'm going to go back to bed and have nothing else on that day. So we can schedule accordingly. Like some things we don't have control over when they're scheduled, but we can navigate the rest of our life around what we need it to be and create that balance and that harmony. So I hope that answered Penny's question. Happy to dive into that further if there's more clarity that she wants.
Yep, cool, thank you. So Penny, yeah, let us know if there's anything more on that. So in terms of, because this is fascinating me. The more I learn about it, the more I just go, whoa, I want to know more. So how would you say, just as a general thing, how does using your cycle help? I mean, you've touched on some of the ways, but if you had to kind of summarize that, how does it help in different aspects of your life?
I think the biggest one is the one that you've already picked up on, is that permission to be kind to myself, be compassionate with myself. And so even when, like I said, this month my energy's been off, I think between lockdowns and kids and like a pile of external stresses also influencing my cycle. But I've still just had this compassion of, well, this is where I'm at. This is the ideal energy. It's not quite landing there. That's okay. Because this is the energy that I'm in. I can still work out. It's okay. This is the energy I'm in today. This is my ideal task list. This is my ideal focus. This is my ideal, we eat dinner. So the kids know, my husband knows, if I'm in deep luteal, which is just before our periods where PMS normally occurs, we're not eating dinner together at the table because it's just not a good plan for anybody. Now we can, because my kids, whoever cooks gets to choose whether we eat together or eat separately. That's their reward for cooking. They get to, because I have 3 introverts and 1 extrovert, and I teeter both ways. And so it just is, that's their motivation to cook, is they get to choose whether we eat together or not. But they all know that irrespective of whether they've cooked or not, making mum eat dinner in deep luteal or in that PMS phase is not wise. And so no one, and they know where I'm at in my cycle. They're all aware of it, which I love. So my boys would have to be the most menstrually educated teenage boys out there because they know, and they operate. My daughter, the first question she will ask me if she wants to do something is, what phase are you in, mummy? So she can work out, is today a good day to ask me to take her to the pool? Is today a day that we can go out and so I'm pretty sure we're going Christmas tree shopping this afternoon, but I'm in the right phase to be doing that. I've had appointments today. I've had this call. Normally I'd need a nap in what, like in the other phases, but I'm energetic and this is energizing me rather than draining. So it's knowing, it's kind of like that difference between the HSP and the extrovert. It's, I know which energy I'm tapping into right now and I know what I need from it. And so that benefit has been huge. And the permission to just go, you know what, I'm not in the mood today. I'm not in the right cycle. I'm not in the right phase. This is going to wait until next week. This is going to wait till a week or two later. And the world is not going to end. That was a really big thing I had to let go of to really embrace planning in flow, was the, if I don't do it now, the world won't stop turning. Like it's okay. So Alexander's room didn't get tidied yesterday. I don't think it's going to get tidied this month at all, because I'm kind of now doing other things. He's quite capable of cleaning his own room, but it's just, I've missed that, and that's okay. It's not going to hurt anybody. So that permission to use my energy, follow and be in alignment, which then opens me up to being more creative in my business, which opens me up to having a better relationship with my husband. Our communication has changed. He'd been tracking my cycle since we got married. So when I started really tracking 6 or 7 years ago, I said something about my cycle. He's like, but yeah, it's time to, like, today's the day. If you're going to phone people to chase up money, today's the day to do it, because that's the phase you're in. And I looked at him like, how did you know that? He's like, he'd been tracking it since we got married. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that I had these different personalities based on where I was in my cycle? So but the ability for us to communicate that together, instead of him just knowing it, now he'll say it out loud. It's like, I'm not walking into that bear trap that you just laid for me. Like that's a clear, no, you can go and do that somewhere else. And so we can have that openness and that communication. So it's changed my marriage, it's changed my business, it's changed my relationship with myself, it's changed my parenting. Every area of my life has been touched by this.
Yeah, I love that. And I think your boys are going to be some of the most well-rounded males on the planet by the sounds of it, and they're probably going to be massive catches for the women that end up with them later on. So yeah, I think that's awesome. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on, first of all, Penny said yes, thank you, she loves the 5 phases option. The other thing I wanted to pick up on was the world ending, because I think that's another big thing that HSPs struggle with, particularly extroverts, because as we talked about, our extrovert side is kind of, I relate the way our extrovert side manifests is almost like the high energy phase of the cycle as well. It's when we make all the plans, when we decide to start on a new exercise routine, when we book all these social engagements, but then HSP side needs some time out, and then that's when things start crashing down. And I think HSPs have this tendency to put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but we don't stop to think that the world isn't going to end. And I know I've had to learn this lesson a couple of times for myself, and it will probably come up again in the future. And I try and pass this on to HSP extroverts as well, in terms of, say, for example, and I know you experienced this the other day, Amy, because you posted about it, when we're sick. So when we're sick, quite often, the things that we're putting pressure on ourselves to continue to do, or to show up for, or to not cancel, are things that if you were to, say, have a car accident and end up in hospital and physically be unable to do them because you physically are stuck in hospital, the world isn't going to come crashing down. The world isn't going to end. And I think I use that example in my own mind quite regularly. Like, if I was stuck in a hospital bed, would the world end if I didn't do this, or if I didn't show up for this, or if I didn't do whatever? And I think that gives us a bit of perspective. And again, it's about that permission piece. It's like giving ourselves permission to actually do what we need to do at the time to respect ourselves. And so it sounds like the cycle just adds that extra knowledge and that extra permission to be able to recognize where we're at.
Yeah, and it's tracking for ourselves. So there's massive generalizations that we can bring in around what will happen in each of the phases. But to start with, we've got to just track ourselves. It's going to be different, and it's different each month. It's different each season, and it's definitely different for each woman. So it starts with understanding ourselves, which comes back to this journey of self-understanding and starting to know ourselves. So generally, I know in follicular, I can be more outgoing and I can go out, I can do stuff. Ovulation, I'm even more active and communicative. And yet there are some months where that's not the case. And that's okay too. So it's just knowing that it's not just our cycle, there's other factors, but it's a great starting point to get to understand ourselves and pay attention to the different energies within ourselves and leverage them. When I am creative, I am creative, and I will, like the kids know, if I hit a creative sort of phase, I'm gone. Like if I'm writing I'll write, I think it was something like 12,000 words I wrote in 3 or 4 days last month, where I just hit that phase, and I'll leverage it. But there's no point in cutting that off and going, well, I've got to do what I've scheduled. So none of my plans are rigid. I really struggle with Monday is vacuuming day, Tuesday is floor mopping day, Wednesday, etc., etc. And I see the value in them, and I think are more fluid. So I cleaned the oven this morning. That wasn't on my to-do list. Well, actually, it's been on my to-do list for about a month. But this morning I was inspired to do it. I was in the right, and I got in and I cleaned the oven. But if I have it scheduled and rigid, and because if you don't do it, then we go to beating ourselves up. So I much prefer, it's called loop scheduling rather than time blocking. And so that's an option. But that's what our cycle gives us. It gives us the loop scheduling. It's like, okay, well, I didn't get to it this month. Next month when I hit that, or if I hit it next week or whenever it is, I will leverage. And there's some things that need to get done, like client sessions are done when client sessions are booked, kind of things. Showing up to this is done when this is booked. So there are some things that are scheduled, and there are some things that are just far more fluid. And cleaning the oven, doesn't matter whether I do it on a Tuesday or a Friday, it just, at some point it needs to be done. And so bringing that flexibility, and I think that's one of the things that following my flow and using my cycle allows me to do. It's like, well, because that's not, as much as we like to say that they're 28-day cycles, they're not 28-day cycles. I don't know any woman that has a consistent, maintained all the time. Sometimes it's 26 days, sometimes it's 35 days, sometimes and it can go outside of that. So just allowing that fluidity, which brings in that permission. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to do this the next time the energy hits, and I'll take care of that. Now, there's some things that that's not appropriate for, and there's some things that it really is appropriate for. So it's, again, creating that balance and that harmony between what must be done, structured and scheduled, and what can be done in flow, and creating that dance.
Yeah, and I love that it gives you that ability to have that flexibility, because it sounds like, yeah, you're right, there are certain things that you do have to show up for. But then you mentioned earlier that if you're aware that you're in a cycle that's not necessarily conducive to doing a lot of this stuff, like showing up live on Facebook, then you can build in perhaps a bit more downtime to kind of regulate the kind of create that balance. And I think that's really, really cool. So in terms of using this process, what would you say, like, what do you love about it? What's your favorite thing or favorite couple of things?
I think it's the clarity that it brings. So there's no more, particularly operating from sort of a heart-spaced, it's like, what do I feel like doing, can become quite overwhelming because we don't know. So rather than what do I feel like doing or what am I in the mood for, I tend to do it the other way around. It's like, what mood am I in and what activities are aligned to that? So I've got my checklists allocated by phase, which ends up being by energy. And I just know, it's like, okay, well, this is the tasks that I've got to get done this month. This is where they'll probably fit cyclically. But if I wake up one day and I am in a different energy, it's like, well, I'll pull that in. I didn't plan to write those words in my book. Like it's on my list of things that I'd like to do, but it's not, I'm going to do, and because it just flowed, it just poured out of me, which is a far more conducive process than, okay, sit down 15 minutes and write 1,500 words every day or whatever. 15 minutes and 1,500 is probably not the right correlation, but you get what I mean. So it allows me to leverage my best self for that task in the moment, instead of trying to be my best self for the task when it's just not in alignment. There's less force. So I love the free flow. I love the compassion I can bring to myself, the love I can bring to myself, and the flexibility and the fluidity, while still, so no one would suggest that I don't achieve doing this. I still probably achieve, like, in my ovulation week, I achieve more than most people do in the entire month, because I'm leveraged and I'm on track. So I love that it gives me that ability. I love that it allows me to connect more deeply. I love that it allows me to, and I use it with my clients. Like, the client, sometimes we discuss it openly, sometimes it's kind of behind the scenes, but I can generally read where someone is based on, particularly someone I'm working with closely, like my clients. And I'll just note, it's like, okay, well, I can see that this is the energy that's coming through right now. I'm not going to push. I'm not going to bring hustle and you've got 20 things to, or, oh my God, you're in such peak flow right now. Leverage this. Here are 20 things to go and they'll do it in a day. Whereas in the other phases, it's like, well, your only task for this week is to chill out and relax and reflect, like connect with you, give yourself some rejuvenation space. And sometimes they are challenged by that. And sometimes they've been with me long enough, they embrace that and I'll follow that. So it's a gift for others as well as for myself.
I love that. And I think what I'm getting from it in terms of how I see it helping women is it just seems to be so much more, I feel like it adds freedom almost to your life, because just listening to you and when you talk about having like your kind of to-do lists, but they're separated by phases, and then you get better at going, okay, well, I didn't get to that because I wasn't really in that phase at that time, but that's okay. Like it feels to me like just such a pleasant way of adding flexibility to your life, but at the same time adding freedom, but also almost being more productive, because as you say, you're leveraging the time when it's worth leveraging, rather than trying to push yourself in the times when you really shouldn't bother, because you're just going to make yourself feel worse. So it just sounds like to be like, to be a bit woo-woo and cliche or whatever, it sounds corny, but it just almost sounds like this magical fairyland that you get to live in and just go, woohoo, yeah, I'm just flowing with it, and just, I don't know, it just sounds really cool. Like, I'm just loving learning about it. Yeah. So in terms of, can you tell us a little bit about how maybe it has helped your clients? So I think we've kind of covered how much it's helped you. What are do you have any success stories or how it's helped some of your clients?
Yeah. So like I say, it's probably not something I do too overtly with clients. Like, I can. I am a certified period coach, which is kind of cool. It's not something I normally use in my marketing. It's not something I normally put out there. But I think the biggest benefit to my clients, and I don't even know that they're aware of this a lot of the time, is it changes how I show up to the session. So I read their energy, and it means I'm meeting them. So instead of me just showing up with, okay, we've got to get stuff done and we've got to be productive and we've got to tick boxes and we've got to move through stuff, it's like, well, where are they at energetically? And so even if it's not an overt conversation, it's kind of happening behind the scenes, and allows them that freedom and the compassion and the ability to tap into their own preferences and their own, where they're at, and gives them that permission. It's okay to slow down this week.
And I think, can I just touch on that? Because I think that there is what so many women need in a coach. Because I can just think of the number of times, because I've had a few coaches over the years, and I can just think of a lot of the time I've been almost resistant to having a coach because of that push, particularly because when I first got into this, I made the mistake of getting involved with JT Fox, and that was very quite a traumatic experience, to be honest, and cost me a shitload of money. But that's very much about hustle, push. You're not going to be successful unless you work 80 hours a week. And so the majority of the time I ended up like either feeling like I was going to be a failure or just thinking I would never be able to be successful because it is physically impossible for me to do that with my illness. So I imagine that exactly what you're talking about in kind of tapping into the client's needs, it almost removes that fear or that resistance that some of us have around getting involved with a coach, because the whole idea of coaching often is somebody to help push you outside of your comfort zone and help you achieve more than you perhaps would by yourself. But I think a lot of us, I know HSPs in particular, resist that because we're like, but sometimes we don't want to be pushed. Like that's the worst.
And there's a time and a place, and sometimes the push that people need is to slow down. That's the getting out of their comfort zone. That's the embracing the possibilities within them, and it's recognizing that. One of the things I've started doing when I interview coaches for myself these days is including that in my interview process of I use my menstrual cycle. How are you going to cope with if I say to you that's not happening this week, I'll do that in 2 or 3 weeks when I'm in the right phase. And the coach, so currently I'm working with 2 coaches sort of quite closely. One is my period coach. So clearly she's okay with that because she's where I learned it from. And the other is the coach that we share, and she's great with that. So, and I will every now and then, because we're moving through a structured program, and I'll just say, great, I see that that's important. I'm not doing that for 3 weeks. Like I've just come out of like the time that it would have been perfect. And one-on-one, I see no reason not to be embraced. I mean, a structured program gets a little bit trickier to navigate. You don't want people falling too far behind. She knows me well enough to go, I know that like if I say I'm going to do it in 3 weeks, it'll be done. Like I'm not going to fall behind. So it's building the trust with the coach, but making sure that they are, and it's okay to do that. I think clients often forget that they get to choose how the coaching, particularly for coaching is a client directed process. And so I always include that. Now I've had some coaches say they'll be fine with it, and then they're not once we get into working together and they don't really understand what it means. And I've had others that have just embraced it fully. And the rule is, so one of the coaches I worked with is like, well, if you haven't done it within 4 weeks, then we're having a conversation. Like that gives you every phase. He was a male coach. He didn't understand, but he's like, okay, well, when is this you've got 4 weeks. And that was his blanket. It's like, I'm not because he couldn't correlate and didn't want that level of intimacy of understanding my cycle, which is a fair call on his part. But he's like, it's got to happen within the 4 weeks because that gives you every access to the phases. So coaches are meant to respond to our preference. And the same with the HSP-E. I've had coaches that just haven't understood. Actually, I just need to normally I show up bright and bubbly and ready for action. Today I'm in like my HSP side and I just need a little bit of, and I'm caught in the loop. A lot of my coaches have never known what to do when I get caught in that loop of depth of processing. But it's okay as the client to say, this is what I need right now. This is what I need from you. And either they can deliver it or they can't. And that's okay. We get to choose. They're a service provider like anything else. And so, I think that's the gift that my clients get, because I'm open. So they're starting to be more open about their cycles because I am very open. I do weekly mentoring, and every now and then I'm like, I'm not in the right phase for this. This is going to be a slow, I'll pick up if I need to, and I'm showing up for them. But energetically, you guys need to bring a little bit more, and I'll then respond to and I'll lift, but I'm not coming in high. And then other weeks I'll come in high and I have to remind myself to sort of tame down because we're not all synced. But it definitely gives them the gift of expressing their needs and knowing that I have no objection, and it doesn't matter whether it's a cycle need or whether it's another need, that permission to express needs openly and talk about things based on our preferences. Like, this is where I'm at, this is what I want today, and acknowledging that that's going to be different. We're not one size fits all. It's not, this is, we set out in the coaching agreement that you want to be pushed, I'm going to push you and I'm going to make you do work and we're going to create. It's not that. It's the what's going to align for you in this moment. And I think that gift of just, I don't know where you're at, I don't know where, like, let's meet and just discover what it is that you need based on where you're at energetically.
Yeah,
and so while it's not necessarily flow related, it's across that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you just mentioned that I think is a really valid point for all HSP extroverts, and not just in a coaching relationship, but just in life in general, is getting comfortable with asking for what you need and for what you want, because traditionally that in my experience is quite challenging for HSP extroverts. So we because we tend to put others' needs before our own, we feel funny sometimes about asking. So I think that comes across in that coaching relationship, as you say. We should be able to say, this really isn't working for me right now. Can we change tack, or can we do this, or can we do that? But I think that's just in general life as well. I think HSP extroverts could do a lot to get more comfortable with expressing what they need and what they want, and that's okay to put yourself first on more occasions than you normally do.
Yeah, and recognizing that that's going to change from, like, so if we're in the extrovert, our needs is different to when we're in the HSP, and it's something my husband struggled with for a long time. He's now worked out that so between the cycle work that I've done and the HSP-E work that I've done, my needs are going to change. Some days I need him to sit with me and shut up and just be quiet with me. Some days I need him to sit with me and have the depth of conversation with me and explore, and it is going to change, and there's not a rhyme or reason to. I think he likes the cycle better than the HSP-E because the cycle's a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, it's more predictable, yeah.
But it will be variable and it will be changing, and that's okay. So it's okay to need something one day and need something else the next day.
And somewhat opposite things too, as you say. Yeah. Love it. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're almost at time. Not that we have to stop at an hour, but it feels like we've kind of I've come through like the things that I definitely wanted to ask you about. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been absolutely fascinating for me, because I'd learned a little bit just from following you and watching your posts and things like that, but I've learned so much more, and I'm just so fascinated with it. It sounds like such an amazing thing and such an amazing service that you can offer women just to understand this process a lot better. So in terms of what next, I know that you've got a free course, which I think is very generous. So can you just tell everybody who's watching a little bit about what it is? I'll post the link after we finish.
Yeah, so it's something I'm still building, which is why it's free, and it'll stay free until it'll probably stay, there'll be a version of it stay free, because to me, it's information that everyone needs. Like, man or woman, we all need to understand that, in the same way that the HSP-E Awareness Week is so important. I think the menstrual awareness is so important. In it, there is a video that's designed for coaches about PMDD. I'm working with PMDD that goes quite in depth. It was my assessment video that I did. But there's also 2 articles. They're not videos. At some point I may turn them into videos, but for the moment they're just written documents. So one is a man and his 4 wives, and it goes through the 4 different phases and the 4 different personalities that come through. And then the second one is the 5 energetic phases and how they correlate to. So when I wrote A Man and His 4 Wives, I was working on 4 phases within the menstrual cycle, which is what most will tell you there are. I've noticed energetically there's really 5. And so the 5th one kind of shifts, the second article shifts into where I've sort of tapped into those 5. So it goes through the 5 different energies. If you're looking to create those 5 morning routines, that would be your reference point. And it's got mostly business tasks in there, but the different tasks to do. And also a link to My Beautiful Mentors program, which goes into this even more in depth, which is a low cost program. So anyone wanting to learn more about the different sensors in FLO and the different way she goes far more into depth into the hormones and those kind of, that's not my expertise. My expertise is the practical application. Hers is the behind the scenes, what the hormones are doing, what it's doing in our body, and those kinds of things. So there's a link to that in there as well. So it's just a nice introduction to, if you want to learn more about FLO, you want to learn more about the energies and more about how to leverage this for your productivity, it's a great starting place.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm definitely adding it to my list to do, that's for sure, because I'm really, fascinated, because it just feels like it just has this really good feel about it, I think, as a way of kind of managing my day to day. And I'd love to see how it kind of assists me in terms of, I'm wondering if it would maybe even help me not have the crashes perhaps as much, because I'm wondering if my crashes potentially correlate with a phase. So it'll be, because at the moment my fatigue crashes are when I basically end up in bed. I can't do anything. They seem to be a little bit random and sometimes pop out of nowhere. Sometimes I know why I'm crashing because I've pushed too much. But I'm definitely going to do the course because I think it would help me. But anybody who doesn't have a chronic illness, definitely do it, because I think it would just potentially change your life in terms of how you manage things and how you be more effective in your life. So thank you again for joining us. Is there any final words that you'd like to say to everybody before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. I really appreciate the work you're doing. I think they are definitely very complementary, the cycles, the HSP-E, and also the chronic illnesses that are kind of in there. They're all interrelated and intermingled, and building awareness in any one of those areas allows us to create the lifestyle that we love and really step into our personal power and really living that life that's designed for us and our own personal preferences instead of the way society tells us we're meant to be. Breaking free of those traps. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and I'm all with that. Let's tell society to shove it, and we're going to do it our own way. We're going to create a new way. This is the new way to live life that works better for us as opposed to how society says we should do this. And I think most HSP extroverts have an inner rebel. So let's get our inner rebels out and start to buck the trend, work with our cycle, work with our two conflicting personalities, HSP and extrovert side, so that we can be more effective. And as you say, step into our own power and live life authentically for us. I think that's such a beautiful thing to be able to achieve. So, So thank you so much again. Thank you everybody for watching. I'll post the link to Amy's course below. It's free, so definitely take advantage of that. And if you have any questions that have come up throughout the video, I'm sure Amy would be happy to circle back if you need, if you would like a question answered. And if you have been watching the replay, would love to hear your thoughts. These things that we put on do take a bit of energy for us, so it's always so appreciated if you share your thoughts and let us know that at least you've just even watched it. Even people saying #replay, I love, because it means that we know that people are watching it. So please do comment, let us know what you think, and Amy and I will both be very much appreciative of that. So thanks again, Amy. I'm going to stop the live stream now.